Hello and welcome to Friends of the Force, a Star Wars podcast. I'm your host, Brad.
And I'm your host, Sarah.
And this week on the show, we have the pleasure of being joined by Star Wars author John Jackson Miller to discuss The Living Force, which is his latest adult novel from Penguin Random House. This one was a fun one, Sarah, and I'm super happy that we get to talk with John today about it.
Yes, this is his first full-length novel. He's written a number of short stories in the meantime, but his first full-length Star Wars novel in a decade since A New Dawn. So it was really exciting to see kind of his vision and his point of view in Star Wars again in a full-length novel, and we were really excited to talk to him about it. Now, I will note that this is a spoiler-light, spoiler-free generally interview. So if you have not yet read the book, you will not be getting super spoiled on any, of the end points or anything like that.
But there are some things that we hint at story-wise throughout. So, take that as you will. If you want to know nothing about the book, this is probably not the episode that you want to listen to. But this was a really fun conversation. I love this book. I think there were a lot of moments throughout that had me really intrigued. And in the year of the 25th anniversary of Phantom Menace, this is one that just hits a little bit different as well, which is super exciting. So
the timing was impeccable. The synergy was synergying.
Absolutely.
I tried.
And as you mentioned too, so John's written A New Dawn amongst so many other Star Wars stories, including the Legends Kenobi novel, as well as many, many stories in the Knights of the Old Republic era, just to name a few. So we are so honored to be joined by John today. And without further ado, let's turn it over to our conversation with author John Jackson Miller. So it's been about 10 years since your last full-length Star Wars novel, which was A New Dawn. So much has happened since then in the world of Star Wars, and we were so excited to see you coming back to write a prequel era novel. How does it feel to have that story out on bookshelves? It's been a couple of weeks at this point, and what's it been like seeing reception from fans?
It's been great. I haven't been really gone because I continue to have short stories, and I did a novella for Canto Bight a few years ago. I did some comics for IDW on the Star Wars side of things. But a full-length story, and actually what has turned out to be my longest full-length story for Star Wars was great to be able to do. And the response from folks has just been really great.
Awesome. We've really enjoyed it. And we have been, following all your short stories and stuff. I almost brought my Canto Bight novel to come get signed by you over the past weekend. But then I was like, I'll bring Living Force instead. So I'm so glad to know that you've, been continuing to write through Star Wars, and exceptionally glad to have you back at the full length novel because there's so much good stuff in this novel. But before we kind of dive in to all the details of this book, reflecting back on your career, how did you get your start in writing and eventually joining the world of Star Wars publishing?
Well, I had written stories as a kid and my own comics as well. I certainly had some experience, writing, short fiction. I remember I won the city of Memphis had a wordsmith writing competition, and I won that in 7th grade, and I was like, okay, that's pretty good. Almost entirely on the basis of a short story that I wrote that also won its division, and I continued to be interested in writing on the fiction side, but all of my work ended up being on the nonfiction side, where I was working as a journalist, editing the campus high school newspaper, and then my college newspaper, and then magazines about the comics industry later on. It was after that or actually in the middle of that I ended up getting approached to do a series at Marvel. The Crimson Dynamo comic series led to a year on Iron Man, and then Iron Man, I followed that up with Star Wars. Just did a single issue of Star Wars Empire for Dark Horse. That led to the entire Knights of the Old Republic comic series, which then led to Prose, Lost Tribe of the Sith, Knight Errant, Kenobi, New Dawn, and everything that's followed.
I feel like you've gotten to play in so many fun worlds throughout your career, and Star Wars is definitely at least, you know, we're a little biased here. So Star Wars might be one of the most fun, if not the most fun one. But I'd love to know for some of our listeners too, were there any works that were really formative for you while growing up and while growing into that writing role? And how did Star Wars play into that as well, just in terms of fostering creativity and that world building imagination for you?
Star Wars #1 from Marvel was the first sort of grown-up comic book I ever read in 1977. Splinter of the Mind's Eye was the first original, sort of adult novel that I read in 1978. One of the things is that, I remember, of course, obviously, having the action figures and comics and novels and everything else in that sort of stretch there when Empire is coming out. I also remember a friend of mine created a sort of a world, our own outer space world with schematics and everything else, and that it actually at the time that was something that for Star Wars didn't really exist. So our inspiration from that was books like Mr. Scott's Guide to the Enterprise and the Starfleet Technical Manual. But the whole notion of the book was that this is written in universe, because we had this giant notebook of all of our drawings. This is written in universe as, this is this particular outfit's space force. This is what the cities look like. This is what everything looks like. This is the index of aliens that we had come up with. And there's a serious Star Wars influence to all that was doing there. And then when I was writing my own comics, I had various spaceships, which were sort of thinly veiled equivalents of the Millennium Falcon. I think it was definitely in there playing a role when I was growing up.
When Random House World's Tom Holer first approached you with the idea for this book, what were some of the first thoughts that, ran through your mind? And what did you immediately know would be kind of the most essential pieces of telling a story about the Jedi Council in this era?
Well, the offer came while I was getting ready to drive to the release event for my previous novel, which was Star Trek: Strange New Worlds: The High Country. And when I saw it, first of all, obviously, happy to see the offer. But then, the mention of the Jedi Council, my initial visceral reaction was, who likes the Jedi Council? Because they fail. They fail at just about everything later on. I was like, well, let me tackle that straight on. And I said pretty much my first response back, if I can have Qui-Gon Jinn and Obi-Wan, but if I can have Qui-Gon Jinn and have him walk into the Jedi Council chamber and call them out on their inaction and their inability to see what's going on around them, that's the book. And so we were just right there from the beginning.
I loved at New York Comic Con when the way you phrased it at the panel there was he tells them to go touch grass, which I loved. I love that phrase. I think it's always a funny one. But starting the novel, speaking of Qui-Gon, with Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, I think was very, very exciting. Very you, especially just with your interests. But Qui-Gon reminds Obi-Wan to be mindful of the living force, kind of echoing Phantom Menace, and tells the council, and this is the quote on the back of the book, help one person, and a Jedi needs no permission to do that. So why do you feel Qui-Gon was the right person, the right Jedi to ground us in that story initially? And why is that reminder to the council sort of this like unspoken truth that they need to be reminded of while they're up and about in their ivory tower?
Well, obviously in the movie, he tells Obi-Wan to be mindful of the living force. We see a little bit of conflict there where, Obi-Wan is not happy that, we pick up these useless life forms along the way. And of course, Qui-Gon is pretty much, there's no such thing as a useless life form. Even Jar Jar might actually come in handy one day. He's very much, I think, attuned to, a part of the force that is much more grounded in the present day reality And even though he is obviously interested in the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the force, his eyes are open, because anybody like that is either going to be way down the road, and that's what they're trying to foresee, or that person might be right there, here and now. And he finds that person right there, here and now, because that's where he's looking, because he's actually paying attention. And so, I really felt that, especially since we had established that he had rejected the offer to join the Jedi Council, that it made sense that he would come in and be the one who would challenge them. He's not a rebel. I think the line is in the book. He's just unorthodox. He's not willing to follow the council's line everywhere it goes.
Definitely. And I always love when he gets brought into stories just to kind of poke at them a little bit, because he's seeing the world a little bit differently, which is exciting, and which is what we get in this novel, which is great. There's a kind of a really interesting piece with the title of this novel too. We first hear the living force, of course, in the Phantom Menace, and then Terry Brooks in the novelization expanded upon that by putting it side by side with the cosmic force. As you begin to explore the living force and the cosmic force, what intrigued you kind of about the balance of these two, and just about this concept in general?
Well, in that novelization, Terry Brooks, delineates the difference between the living force and what he then called the unifying force, which is the everything. And I had always felt that, from many years earlier, I had felt that Obi-Wan and Yoda had given Luke bad advice about basically not going back to save his friends. They were defending the institution. They were defending the big picture. They were making the same mistakes again that they had made before. And Luke defied them, and that ends up ultimately saving him and saving everything. So I really was interested in being able to do this, realizing that the book title was available. There had been a novel called The Unifying Force, but The Living Force, they had just done a few, they had done a role-playing game campaign for the Saga edition, and then they did a few short stories associated with it. I was surprised to realize that I actually, a friend of mine from college co-wrote those short stories that were attached to the Living Force many years ago. I was really glad that we were able to get that title for the book, because I can't think of anything else that would have worked better.
I like that you call that out. I think that's something we don't appreciate enough as readers, is like how hard a title is. We went through that when we were starting the podcast. Like, what do we call our podcast? There's like 400 Star Wars podcasts out there. So like looking at Star Wars books in that world, oh my gosh, it feels nearly impossible. But I feel like you hit the right kind of tone with that title. And just in general, like when we think about the living force, the here and now, all the things around us, you do a great job world building in this book. We're on Quinn. We're with the pirates, we're in the slice, like so many things, literally a slice of life story, pun intended. So what was it like to sort of explore the reality that the Jedi have kind of receded into obscurity in a way, piracy is running rampant, and that maybe the Jedi won't be welcomed back with open arms as much as they would like in the galaxy when they try to go out there and talk with the people and be present?
I determined that the way to do this book was to confront them with a place that was changing, and a place that was changing because they had left it behind. A place that was changing because of their neglect, whether purposeful or not. And so I established this planet in this territory that I felt would be pretty rife for piracy. I established this planet that was once a great triumph of theirs. But as we hear them talk about it, someone says, "How long?" I think Mace says, "How long has it been since any of us have actually been there?" And that kind of is the way of it. People will speak of these great landmarks and how important they are culturally. But then you'll say, well, how often do you go there? How many people actually are visiting? It might be in worse shape than you think. And so that allowed me to create sort of this arena, one literally, and then a bunch of little arenas in the islands that we depict in the map in the book, which is it gives them sort of these petri dishes to visit. Each one has a slightly different economic standing. And we get to see what the people think of them in each place, if they do think of them. We touch on a bunch of different levels because we have people that their interactions are with the Jedi are non-existent. We have people that are just dealing with personal situations. But we even have the sort of the TV talk show hosts that argue with one another, debating what the Jedi should be doing here. And I figured the best person to throw at those people was Yaddle, because she would be zen enough to handle that situation.
She's awesome. We love Yaddle in this house, and we also love maps. And I just want to compliment the map in this book, and also the clever way of having all of these different locales within this area to kind of give us these different perspectives. I thought that was really clever as we went throughout the book, especially since it got set up as okay, we're closing these outposts because nothing's really going on these places, or nothing tangible is, but and the reality of that is that those decisions obviously have consequences. And also even the small amount of lives that maybe the Jedi were still in touch with in these places that are getting closed are important, and also have ripple effects throughout the communities. And I think that was really present throughout the book, so I really enjoyed that, so thank you. I think what's really interesting is this book kind of bridges a gap between, the Jedi Council of the prequel era, of course, as they are just about to be in that part of their lives where everything goes to crap real fast for them. But with the Jedi of the High Republic, which when we meet them, they're at their height before things go downhill, and also that they're very in tune with the living force. There's a lot more kind of going on in their world in terms of the worlds they're touching, and also what they allow within the order. So what did you kind of find to be an effective way of drawing attention to the differences between these two eras, maintaining the hope that the Jedi can start living in the here and now, and also saying these are not the same people anymore?
Well, about a third of the council was alive and still on the council back then. And so that was helpful. And that gave me, some people who could be wistfully nostalgic, but also some people who could be this was once better. We have, again, Yaddle saying we used to have these meetings face to face. And just we have the whole dynamic that the Republic has just put so many demands on the Jedi, some of which is manipulated by Palpatine, but yeah, I mean, it's just really put so many demands on the Jedi that the Jedi are being pulled in 6 different directions. None of which are, central to what they would hope that their role would be. They are just bogged down in minutia. I remember one of the lines when we were going in the editing process. One of Deepa's lines about, we've been talking for 3 hours, and only now we got to the important part, which was never on the schedule in the beginning. The note in the margins was, this all could have been an email. I think that should ring true for anybody in a situation where they're in this, this kind of an institution which has been around forever. It's everybody that is part of it is aware of their own importance, convinced of their own importance, convinced of the fact that they're pretty much right about everything, and yet there's all this contrary evidence that they're having to cope with, I felt like Qui-Gon is the instigator here, but they were all feeling it.
I just think it's really interesting that you mentioned that, there are a handful of the council members that were council members in the High Republic era, because when I initially was thinking about this book and getting ready to dive into it, I was saying, well, this has got to be a challenge because these people were around then, and now it's kind of like, because of the way that all these things are written, not necessarily linearly in terms of the Star Wars galaxy, that it might be challenging to say, well, I'm just going to forget, the past in a way. But I like that you say it's actually more of an opportunity to kind of draw the connections. I wouldn't have thought it thought of it like that as a creative, but that's why I don't write these books.
Well, somebody in the beginning when we posted the map responded, "Oh, actually, I think Reddit ended up putting spoilers on the map," and it's like spoilers for the High Republic. And I think people must have thought, oh well, there's going to be a High Republic book coming up. It's going to show the creation of this great work on Quinn. And I was like wanting to say, guys, no, I deliberately made this its own thing so that I wouldn't be in the way of everybody else. Is it possible now we will see it show up in previous or the things that took place earlier? Sure, that's how this works. Who knows? It's possible. But again, I wanted to try to evoke that era without spoiling anything from it.
Speaking to the council members themselves, one of my favorite parts of this book was getting inside each of their minds, because when you see them in the movie, they're all sitting around, they're all talking, and that seems to be all they do. They don't go out into the galaxy. But like getting inside their minds, like you're saying, like things that they have to start to cope with, revelations, a little bit of disillusionment with the Jedi Order, maybe even, and like the way that the council operates now. I just wasn't expecting that from certain people. So I'm sure that was both exciting and a bit of a challenge to figure out, how each of those Jedi Council members would be thinking. So can you share a little about your process to like build so many Jedi Council members out, and also like pairing them with one another, where your mind was at there?
I looked at each character's official history, and then I also looked at each character's Legends history to see if I could have some elements that would rhyme with that. And which we do in the case of characters like Even Peel, where there's much more about him in Legends and where he came from that may not necessarily be operative in my era that I'm writing here. But I figured I try to make all accounts correct if I can. And have these things, at least as I say, sort of rhyme with what we've seen in the past. I looked at things like, I don't even know that I necessarily knew, even at the time, because the comics, I can't remember if they'd come out yet. I don't think I knew at the time that Eth would later quit. Actually, I knew he would quit. I didn't know the mechanism that we would see, or we find out about later in, I guess it's the Darth Vader comics. I figured that's a guy who I wanted somebody to be disillusioned enough that it may not be a lifer. I wanted to sort of come up with sort of things for everybody. I wanted to show that this was not the first time these characters have ever talked to each other, that there are existing conversations and existing relationships, existing arguments that are going on. That some of them are have more patience than the others, and so I wanted to try to do that, and in some cases I was just sort of like, well, rather than put Sazy 10, who I perceive would be the gruff mechanic type, rather than put him with somebody like somebody who's much more antic and fun loving like Uriel Poof. I thought that would be less interesting than having Uriel hanging out with Ki-Adi-Mundi, who is just trying to keep his calm in every situation, and just never raises his voice. That would prove, to Uriel to be a challenge. By putting Sazy with Plo, Plo is also not a people person, but he's a little bit more mellow. I thought that was interesting. And then there's a dynamic with Yoda and Adigalia, where out of her deep respect for him, she has basically taken on all of his chores, everything he doesn't want to do, and she is just about to crack from all of that, we get at least an arc with these relationships, and we don't necessarily end them all with hope that things will change. Adi, there's a fairly good chance that she goes right back to having to do everything she was doing, because it's not like the problem is going to go away.
I think it's also interesting because we do get these really interesting pairings that we get to follow throughout the book, but we also have, some characters that are more isolated from the rest of the council, and Depa being, I think, a key character here. She is kind of a standout for me as she is kind of on the front lines, learning more about kind of getting on the inside of the piracy kind of going on Quen. And among the council members, she's already really proximate to the people in the action on Quen, and in this story, and in turn is isolated from the rest of the council in order to kind of figure things out. What kind of made you choose Depa as the council member to take on this more proximate action focused role in the story, and what do you hope readers take away from her character, or is there any specific character that you hope they grab onto?
Well, I had written her before, very briefly in A New Dawn, and I like sort of the way that called back on that, especially as I intended for her to have this young person that she was going to be helping, and somebody who again in Legends, she grows up in this region, and it's tumultuous, and I think we get the idea that she's older when she's recruited by Mace Windu. That no longer necessarily being the case, I figured, well, but she would still be interested in this region that her people came from, and that I would give her an additional thing going on with not a former Padawan of hers, because I didn't want her to have a Padawan, but a former student that looked up to her, who has been killed in this region in his first mission, and that is the cause for all of this. And her drive, her arc here is to sort of both get this young person that she's encountered to a position of safety, um, but also come to terms with her own view about attachments, and whether she should take a Padawan being on the council, because the sense that I get, and again, this is not anything official, but um, I don't see the counselors necessarily having students. They've got a lot of students. They teach everybody, and so the situation that she's in, I felt was kind of unique, and so I put her in that position.
Yeah, it was fascinating to watch her on the front lines. I think she was one I walked away from being the most surprised by, of like, wow, I'm really a big Deppa fan coming out of this book. And again, like some of the revelations that kind of come out of that story, and her feelings about the situation that she was put in. I think it kind of illustrates just some of the not so great aspects of the order, and sets that up for the future. Speaking of just Jedi in general, and surprises and maybe some challenges, we want to ask you a couple rapid fire questions related to the council. Our first being, who was your favorite Jedi Council member to write?
Really, it's whoever I was writing at the time. Yeah, I will say that it is easier when I am writing the character more or less from scratch. So a case like Uriel, or Yariel, or whatever it is, that's something where there's really nothing about him anywhere. Likewise, characters like Oppo, and yeah, Evan Peel, and you also get Eth. These are characters that very little has been written about, and that allows me to open up a lot more.
On the flip side of that, you mentioned that it was, more difficult maybe to write some of the ones that had more backstory. Who was the most challenging?
The trick with Yoda was to get his voice right. I knew how Yoda would react, but Yoda speak is a very fine-tuned thing, and I think I by default pushed his reversed grammar harder in the first manuscript. We kept taking those bits out because they actually have done the math. He doesn't do that as much as people think. And so they know better than I in terms of how often he says these things. But it's always it's whatever works to your ear. And I enjoy that I was able to make Yoda's grammar plot point.
Yeah, I was gonna say he may not do it often, but he might do it when it matters most, and that's all I will say.
Yeah.
And I do love him in this book and some of his side quests that he goes on in relation to visiting a grandfather, and I think some of that was just extremely, extremely touching. I walked away having to put down the book after that chapter, and I was like, wow, need to sit on that one for a bit, because I think we often see Yoda in sort of this very complicated position of concealing things and keeping things from the Jedi Order. And so it was interesting to see him maybe more in tune with the living force than we often think. Last question here would be, who surprised you the most out of the bunch? So maybe a character or a Jedi that you walked away from being like, oh, I didn't think I would feel inclined towards that character at all, or just didn't think we'd go down that avenue.
Mace Windu, I figured out the on ramp into his character. Again, he's very much an institutionalist in the sense that he's there to defend the Jedi Order, the way things have been done, and that sort of thing. And I figured the way to basically make that an interesting contrast is to put him in an arc with a character who is even more an institutionalist, but a different institution. And that is where I brought in from my one of those short stories I did, I brought in Pel Balo, who is very much the poster child for the Republic Navy, as far as I'm concerned. He founds the military school for them. He ends up training Ray Sloan later on, many years later, and he is somebody who we already saw in that later short story is willing to tell Darth Vader where to go, and without any hesitation. And I figured, you know what, let's put him up against Mace, and have them just butt heads for a while, and again, it also allows me to get into things that I've been interested in since back in the Knights of the Old Republic days with Captain Karath, or Admiral Karath, and Zane, and Zane's commanding officer Morvis, about what should the relationship between the Republic and the military, the Republic and the Jedi, and then the military and the Jedi be, because we will get into the Clone Wars where the Jedi are running the military, and what does the Navy think of that? At least what does this one guy think of that? So that by having Mace in there and having Mace in a position where he's forced to be patient with somebody who is just as, if not important in his own institution, somebody who is as headstrong. I think that made for those were chapters I was always happy to get back to.
You can definitely feel that tension kind of right in the beginning, and I'm like, he's met his match a little bit here.
Yeah.
Those were fun to read.
Yeah, and Balo saying, hey, there was a time, or I think it might have been Mace saying, hey, there was a time when the Republic Defense Coalition and the Jedi used to work together. So not even thinking forward to when the Jedi become soldiers, but looking back at the High Republic when those groups are trying to fend off the Nihil. It's so interesting to think about that relationship throughout time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is a question we love to ask authors, especially if you could have any character from your book, either a council member or any other character you wrote, sit down with any other character in Star Wars, regardless of time period or side of the galaxy they're on, who would you choose and what would they talk about? There's no wrong answers here. Every answer is a good answer.
All canon is out the window.
Yeah, a character from this book. Well, I was going to say, in general, I'd love to have Griff from the Old Republic talk to Lando about trading tips for being being wheeling and dealing and wealthy, because that would be really interesting. It would be nice for I think Luke Skywalker, who has later on, the older Luke, who's seen how things go. It would be nice for him to talk to Qui-Gon Jinn, I think, who's obviously in the book, because he gets the chance to talk to Obi-Wan a lot, and Obi-Wan's interactions with Luke in the movie are all ones of the later ones, the ghostly Obi-Wan ones, are all from a place of wistful defeat and regret, and it would be nice if and of course Yoda is also sort of in that place too by then, so it'd be really interesting to see what Qui-Gon would say to him.
I feel like Qui-Gon would have a lot to say.
Yeah. Qui-Gon to me is almost like Luke's great grandfather in a way, when you think about it from a certain point of view, So that's a great answer. There are no wrong answers to that question. But the last thing we will ask you here is, looking back on all your work and getting to add this to your repertoire and in your bookography, what does Star Wars mean to you at the end of the day?
It's been a great place to go to work for 20 years. It's beyond being a job. It's been a fun workspace. I have not yet run out of things to write about. And it's the case where, fairly regularly, I'm offered things where I'm not really sure the first instant what I would do with it, and I usually have the answer within about a minute, because there's whether it's the gambling story in Canto Bight, or this story here, or I found a way to make a significant part of New Dawn mine, because even though it existed to introduce this relationship between Kanan and Hera, I was able to get into the Imperial Navy, and a character like Ray Sloan, and another character like Count Vidian, and so it's rarely been the case where I felt like I didn't have room to create.
We'll never stop creating, because whether it's a short story or a novel, we can't wait for whatever's next for you in Star Wars. So thank you so much for joining us to talk about The Living Force, and readers out there should get your hands on it and read it as soon as possible. It is a great one. John, where can our listeners find you online, and what work do you have coming up that you'd like to give a shout out to, and anywhere that you're appearing?
Okay. Also am at GalaxyCon in Oklahoma City at the end of May, and I'm working on announcing my June appearances soon. But we have those coming up, and also I've already announced Dragon Con later in the year. Releases coming up. I think it's the 12th of May. We have the very first Star Wars comic I did, which was an issue of Star Wars Empire. That gets reprinted in Marvel Legends Omnibus, The Rebellion Volume 2. That's a giant book. And 1 week after that, we get the reprint, finally, of the first epic collection of the Old Republic, which gives us the first third of the Knights of the Old Republic comic series in affordable paperback form, because now, of course, those are quite expensive. And then in June, we get the trade paperback edition of New Dawn here in the 10th year. And so that comes out and has a slightly different cover, one much more to my much more rhyming with the story. Really, just it involves the coloring of the cover. A much darker cover, which is what I was looking for. And so that's what's coming out from Star Wars. I have my next novel with my same editor, Tom Holler, on Living Force. My next novel coming out from Random House Worlds is Batman Resurrection, which is the first novel that ties directly into the Tim Burton Batman movies, and it takes place in between Batman and Batman Returns. That comes out October 15th in hardcover, audiobook, and ebook. People can find me, JJM Faraway, on Twitter, John Jackson Miller on Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and all the other sites. And my website is farawaypress.com.
Excellent. And I cannot wait for the Batman book, by the way. I'm a huge 1989 fan. My brother is. I'm getting him to buy it. I'm so excited. So thank you again, John, for joining us. We appreciate it. And until next time, may the Force be with you.
And you.
Thank you all for listening to this episode of Friends of the Force. We hope you enjoyed the interview with John Jackson Miller. And once again, Living Force is now out on bookshelves if you want to go check it out for yourself. In terms of our content that we have coming up, feel free to give us a follow on any of our socials or the podcast platform of your choice so that all of our next interviews and book discussions drop right into your feed.
Yes, we have a Patreon where tiers start at just $1. We're very, very, very grateful for our patrons who help keep the lights on here at Friends of the Force. So thank you to AJ, Ben, Brian, Cheryl, Clay, David, Emma, Jennifer, Katie, Knights of Friend, Leanne, Logan, Lucy, Lindsay, Matthew, Nathan, Nicole, Rob, Ruth, Santa, Sky Talkers, Tim, Tom, Topher, and Travis. So much for your support. And thank you to everybody who listened to this interview. I hope that if you have not yet read the book, that you enjoy it, and that if you have read the book, that you enjoyed it. Happy reading, happy books, stay hydrated.
Happy books always. Thank you, everybody, once again. And until next time, may the living force be with you always.
Bye.